Hey folks, this week Simon joins me and we talk with Gary Williams about OggCamp. That's the Unconference, all about free software, free culture, and a bunch of mates getting together to have a good time. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is Floss Weekly, episode 803, recorded Tuesday, October 1st. Unconferencing with OggCamp. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and this week we have, it's not software this week, it's more about free culture and open source culture. We're talking about OggCamp, and of course, it is not just me. We've got the great, the amazing Mr. Simon Phipps. Hey, Simon.
It's me.
It's
Hello.
you.
I'm back again.
Welcome back. Always a pleasure. So, OggCamp, you know something about this. Like you're sort of one of the insiders. In fact, you're kind of doing double duty as a co-host and a guest today, aren't you?
Yeah. So the story here is that I have a non-profit that I host in the UK that looks after small community activities. Mm-hmm. So one of the other things it does is it crowdfunds the maintenance of the ODF specification. And a lawyer friend said, hey, this group of people needs a place to host their conference, all the money and the trademarks and the domain names. Mm-hmm. Would you do it? So I agreed years ago that I would host the fiduciary oversight of this thing called OggCamp. And I also go along and act as treasurer at the actual event. So I take the cash box and I buy everyone's lunch and everything. But I don't do any of the other organization, and none of the hard work is actually anything to do with me. And it's a different organizer each year. But we're going to find out more about that now. So I've been involved in it for years, and I'm quite pivotal to it happening, but I'm not actually the person that does the work.
I see. And so the person that does the work this year, is that Gary Williams?
That's Gary Williams.
All right, well, let's go ahead and bring him on.
Volunteer.
Yeah, we've got him waiting in the wings. And Gary, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jonathan. Hey, Simon. Great to be here.
So what our outline for the show is basically like the question words, right? Like what, why, where, who, how is OggCamp? Because we're talking about OggCamp. So let's start with what, and just give us kind of the overview. What is this thing, and why should people care about it?
Yeah, so OggCamp is, we self-describe as a free culture, free open source software, kind of hardware hacking conference in the UK, actually an unconference more accurately. So we've been running for 15 years now, although this is only our 11th year actually running the conference because of the event that happened over the last few years. And really, it's a place to be if you are at all interested in hardware hacking, open culture, FLOSS, and I guess things of that nature.
Is that where the name comes from? OGG? Are you guys really into doing audio compression?
So yeah, the name has a bit of baggage with it. I think we were talking a little bit about this before the show. So OggCamp actually originally came out of a couple of Linux podcasts and came out of the Linux podcasting community. And Ogg Vorbis and Ogg Theora were the hot thing at that time, 15 years ago. So they chose the name Ogg and clung onto it, and it's kind of the name that stuck. So it's Ogg in the sense of, I guess, open formats and open standards, but actually, there's a lot more wider things discussed at OggCamp.
Yeah, completely unrelated to Terry Pratchett.
One of the podcasts, was it the Linux Outlaws? I remember Dan was involved with this for a while.
Yeah, it was the Linux Outlaws and I think the Ubuntu UK podcast at the time.
Yeah, cool. Okay, now you said you guys have taken a break. What's up with that? What in the world would cause that? Why?
Yeah, so we last ran in 2019, and then in 2020, this large virus came and stopped us from running the event in 2020. 2021, similar story. And because we're completely volunteer organised, there were a couple of years there where it just took some time for someone to pick up the slack. Yeah. I was supposed to run OggCamp last year, but we had a baby, and that kind of got in the way of my time to organise things. So I
understand.
Yeah,
I know how that goes.
We did have a great team that was going to run OggCamp the year before that, and they got very nervous about the return of COVID, and so they decided that they couldn't run it. And they eventually stepped back down, and so we had 2 years where that crew was going to run it and found that the environment wasn't right for it. And then Gary last year, and now here we are with running the event for the first time in 5 years in Manchester in the United Kingdom.
Okay, so you have jumped to one of the next questions. It's in Manchester. Have you ever thought about moving it outside of the UK?
I think there have been various people who have asked about running one outside of the UK. I guess the difficulty we've always had is OggCamp's home has been spiritually the north of England. Mm-hmm. So we've done Manchester, we've done Liverpool, we've done various other cities across the north of England. We've ventured south a couple of times. There's been one in Oxford and one in Canterbury. Mm-hmm. But by and large, it's been the north of England. There were a crew looking to run one in Edinburgh, so I guess that's technically outside of England. And there were a crew who were partially interested in running one in Dublin at one point, but that never quite got off the ground. So England has been the kind of spiritual home of OggCamp, but I guess if someone wanted to organise an OggCamp outside of the UK, I can't see why we couldn't.
Yeah, you could have like OggCamp West and OggCamp East and have them, in Berlin and somewhere here in the US. It'd be fun.
It's got quite an eclectic draw, actually. I've been watching the ticket sales.
Yeah.
And there's been people in Germany and France and Belgium all buying tickets and coming over. So although it's located in the north of England this time, there's quite a draw from across Europe, which really quite surprised me when I realized it was happening.
Do you have a decent little handful coming from the States, or are we Yankees not in your target audience?
I don't think we've had any make it this year from the States. I think we have actually had a couple from Japan, places like that, but no one from the States quite yet. So, maybe you should be the first, Jonathan, and go and get a ticket. Although 2 weeks is maybe a bit short notice.
There are still tickets, actually. You can still come.
Yeah.
And it's very surprising where you can fly to Manchester from across the US. There are direct flights from many US cities.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's just say I decide I'm going to come to OggCamp. What should I expect? What's the experience like? Give me a quick survival guide for a first timer.
So I think probably the easiest thing to say about OggCamp is that every OggCamp is entirely different. So we have a set of scheduled talks just to make sure that we've got a bunch of content. So this year we've got 2 rooms worth of scheduled talks, and they're from a variety of people. We've got workshops from people like Utah, one of our sponsors this year, who are Utah, one of our sponsors this year, who are a workers' union here in the UK. But I guess OggCamp's real selling point is that we're an unconference. So in the UK and perhaps in other places, bar camps are quite a popular method of running a conference. And what that means is effectively, if you've got something interesting that you think that OggCamp attendees would want to hear about, write the talk, turn up with it, or indeed don't write the talk, find out what people are interested in on the Saturday. And then what we quite often see is people with their laptop furiously writing their talk on the Saturday night to give on the Sunday. So it's a real variety of topics that you end up hearing about at OggCamp. It's anything from securing your website with a WAF to mental health to what's the latest on what Collabora are doing or whatever else. There's a whole plethora of topics. So no 2 OggCamps are ever the same.
Yeah. You said there's some workshops too where people are actually hands-on with hardware?
Yeah, so we haven't got any official hardware workshops this year, but we have in the past had people, turning up with Raspberry Pis and soldering irons and putting together ESP32 microcontrollers and things. I think there was an event a few years ago, actually, where we had to ask someone with a soldering iron to please go outside of the conference centre because you're setting the smoke alarms off. So they ended up soldering in the car park, which was pretty cool to see.
That's great.
But we encourage, if you've got a cool hardware project to show off, absolutely bring it along. And being in the UK, we've always had quite a lot of the Raspberry Pi community and things there as well. So it's always cool to see.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like fun. I have had an experience earlier in life dragging the sound system, a portable sound system, outside. It was a church in that case, but dragging it outside to the front steps to be able to solder something to fix it and not smoke the inside of the building up. So I know how that goes.
Yeah, it's you get some funny looks from a hotel or a venue when someone breaks out some soldering gear in the middle of one of their conference rooms. That's for sure.
Yeah, I feel like they should know what they're getting themselves into, though, hosting a conference full of geeks and hackers.
Yeah, well, our venue this year have graciously welcomed us back, so clearly we didn't do anything too wrong last time we were there.
Yeah. Okay, what are some of the what are some of the talks that you are excited about that are coming this year?
So on the scheduled track this year, there's a few things that I'm quite excited about, actually. We've got Stuart Langridge talking about open web advocacy. I know that's something that he's been really fighting for. So just getting the open web available across a variety of platforms. I know he's been quite pivotal in getting things like other browser engines available on iOS, which is something that we've all struggled with for a long time. We've got people giving us talks on audio podcasting, which are going to be really cool. We've got Hacker Public Radio actually talking us through what it takes to get your certificate in order to do kind of amateur radio stuff in the UK, and what are all the things you need to consider for that. And then we've got even some of our sponsors this year, like Utah, are doing a workshop on how to organise a union in your workplace, which is something that we know tech in the Europe is particularly ununionised. So they're giving a workshop on why should you join a union and what are the kind of things that you need to think about for that. And then, of course, we've got our classic OggCamp panels this year, which is kind of a look back over the last 5 years and all the things that have changed in free culture since the last OggCamp, and what's been good, what's been bad, how do we make the next 5 years of FLOSS and free culture even better, and how can you play your part. So a bunch of really cool talks going on. I named a few there, but there are a bunch more that we've got available, and they're all at oggcamp.org/schedule. And of course, the great thing is that half of our talks aren't even announced yet, because the attendees make 50% of the agenda at OggCamp. So it might be that someone turns up with something really cool that we just haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, that's fun. Okay, Simon is whispering in my ear here that there is some offbeat stuff that he wants to talk about.
Yeah, so we're going to... one of the things that's always happened at OggCamp has been a raffle. And we've had sponsors supplying toys. Actually, the organisers have a small budget for buying toys as well, and it's very likely that there will be a raffle for all the attendees this year as well. I suspect Gary is going to go out and buy some stuff. I've got a big box of toys next door. I've got things like a robotic car that's powered by a Raspberry Pi.
Nice.
I have a lifetime supply of LEDs. I have those sorts of things. And then we've been talking about having a swaps table this year, like you'd get at a local meetup, where you bring something and take something. And we're not quite sure how that's going to work, but we are probably going to tell attendees to bring good quality things that they would love to have been given, that they can bring along to the swaps table. And then one of the things about OggCamp is it's actually a very safe environment for people who find large public events challenging. There's a lot of very caring people who take care of the folks who are around. And so a lot of what makes OggCamp special actually happens out of the meeting rooms, in the corridor spaces,
the hallway track
open spaces. It's a hallway track, but it's not just a bumping into friends hallway track. It's also a taking care of people who are there for the first time type hallway track too.
Yeah, interesting. Let's see. What was I going to ask about? I had something that came to mind. So, like, what are some of these? It sounds like it's an intersection of a whole bunch of different things. So you've got obviously people that care a lot about open source. Do you have some other niches there? Like, is there a retro hardware enthusiast sort of group that comes? Do you have security people that come? Like, what do these different groups kind of look like? What are the different interests that get represented?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think back 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on who comes,
right?
Yeah. There is a quite interesting profile. I know that one of our organizers has recently got into creating art with plotters and with pen plotters, and there is certainly going to be a little section that is interested in that this year. We've previously had people who are into security having questions about that. There's typically quite a big Ubuntu faction in the room, trying to be friendly, welcoming Ubuntu people. And of course, that's evolved over the 15 years into something completely different now. But it's going to depend on who shows up. We've got a couple of hundred people showing up. Some of them, the names I recognize, lots of people I don't. And it's that OggCamp is the product of the people who come.
Right.
Because we're cowards. We do plan a planned track just in case no one comes with any talks.
Right.
But that's never happened, and so it's going to be the product of who comes, and that makes it quite different to most of the other conferences that I attend, where the conference is I can tell you in advance what's going to be happening at All Things Open,
right.
and I can tell you in advance what's going to be happening at FOSDEM to a certain degree, whereas OggCamp, I can tell you some things that are going to be happening. There's going to be a raffle. There's going to be two rooms full of planned talks. But apart from that, who knows? That's part of the charm of it.
Is that really what's meant by an unconference, that things tend to happen ad hoc?
Pretty much, yeah. So we call it an unconference because there almost isn't a conference, right, until people turn up and make one. So, like I said, we have two rooms of our scheduled track that we come up with, but actually it's the people who turn up and present their interests to like-minded people that really make it an unconference, I think, for me. It's a very it sort of evolves over the 2 days. You find that you get a well-attended talk about TLS from some of the security crowd, and you'll find someone else go, there's a bunch of TLS stuff that they didn't cover in their talk, so I'm going to do another one on TLS tomorrow. And you sometimes find that rooms get full and people are just giving ad hoc talks in hallways or in a hotel foyer, and they've got 10 people crowded around them, or in our kind of event space, someone turns up with a cool toy. I think one year someone turned up with a robot conferencing device that could walk around and be controlled. Nice. And it was just walking around and people were having conversations with it, and it was great. So it's the unexpected, like you say, the thing that really makes it an unconference for me.
Yeah. As you think about the things you have scheduled, like on the official tracks this year, are there any particular talks that you hope people bring? I know that's kind of an interesting question, but is there anything that you don't have covered that you really hope people will cover?
I'm hoping we've got some folk there who are very into Activity Pub, and I'm hoping we're going to get some good horizontal thinking about Activity Pub showing up spontaneously. A shout out to Andy Piper, who I hope will be the catalyst that causes that to happen. But I'm hoping there'll be some really good things about that, because I think that's close to the center of where the biggest hope for open source is at the moment, is getting away from over centralization and moving into federation and having devices and software which is simple enough for everyone to federate instead of becoming the data slave of Meta. And so I really hope is going to show up, that we're going to talk about federation, talk about Activity Pub, talk about cutting the cord to the ad industrial complex.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think for me, I'd love to see some talks about self-hosting coming up. I think there's a bunch of really cool open source projects that people can self-host that are genuine competitors to the proprietary Google Photos or Google Drive or Office 365s of this world that have come along in the last 5 years, and really running with what it is that those products had, but you can run them on a server in your garage, right? And I think that's really cool. So people coming along and talking about those projects and talking about their journey from proprietary platform through to I run everything on a server myself that's in my garage is a really cool thing. I'd like to see some of this year too.
Yeah. I don't suppose you have anybody coming that you know of to talk about Meshtastic? This is a project that I've been spending my time on here recently.
I haven't seen anybody
Okay.
so far who's
I-
involved with that.
I may have to go and drop a link to this in one of the discords and see if anybody there wants to go and give a talk on it, because that would be fun. It's LoRa radios that talk to each other, but they mesh and they're all decentralized. I think it would be a great fit.
Yeah, it sounds like something that
We'd
people
love
would
to
be
hear that.
interested in.
Yeah.
And I'll be bringing one of my Raspberry Pis along and giving a talk about running host on it, because I host most of the things I care about on a rack of Raspberry Pis just downstairs from where I'm sitting, and it's very straightforward to do, and there's no reason why most people couldn't do it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. Simon, you said you are the sort of the treasurer and the I guess sort of the legal host of OggCamp. I'm curious. I'd like to hear more about that. Why such a thing is needed, and what all you do.
Yes. Well, so that arose a number of years ago when a gentleman I work with, who happens to be a lawyer, said that there was a community of people running a conference and they needed a fiduciary host. And I run a small not-for-profit organization called Public Software in the UK. And the reason you need a fiduciary host is because I think, like a conference, there's actually quite a lot of money floating around. OggCamp is going to cost us probably a 5-figure sum of money to put on, and it breaks even. So at the end of the process, there's probably going to be a 5-figure sum of money sitting ready for next year, and somebody's got to keep it, and you've got to trust someone to own it. And this particular conference is one that gets run by whoever is available next year. And so the people who are responsible for it in 2024, possibly none of them will be involved in 2025. So if that's the case, who owns the domain names? Who has got the money in their bank? Who is it that has got the legal standing to make contracts with the hotel? And so that's what Public Software does, the organization that I run. And Public Software provides a home for unincorporated associations of people who are doing things for open source and free culture. So we host OggCamp, and we have one other project called COSM, which is a crowdfunding pot for maintaining the open document format that you find in LibreOffice and now in Microsoft Office. And so I do that. I run the incorporated association that looks after the assets of OggCamp, so that Gary is able to show up and there is money for him to spend on the conference this year. And there is somebody who's willing to sign the contract with the Pendulum Hotel. And there is somebody who is willing to pay the crew radio supplier. And there is somebody who can pick up lunch for the volunteers. And then at the end of the show, Public Software will draw everything together and get ready for next year and make it available to whoever shows up to run OggCamp 2025. So fiduciary hosting, it's kind of like what Software in the Public Interest or Software Freedom Conservancy do for open source projects. Just for things, I do it for things that aren't software, for a small conference, for a standards project. And Public Software has hosted other small activities over its lifetime as well.
Yeah, I guess that's something I didn't think about. But if you have that much money moving around, like if nothing else, you just need to be able to have a paper trail of nobody walked away with $1,000 in their pocket that shouldn't have.
Yep. So we do that, and also, there is value-added tax, sales tax to be collected and paid.
Yeah, that's true too.
So we do that, and that we have credit card machines. Ordinary individuals typically don't have credit card facilities, and we have credit card machines, so we can host the Stripe account, and we have a Square account that we make available. So it's all of these little details that make it possible to put on an event. Modern society has, as in so many other areas, has officialized or bureaucratized the things that previously would have just been the way that mates did things together. So if we'd been running a village fete 40 years ago, we probably wouldn't have needed public software.
Right.
But in 2024, you absolutely need a fiduciary host to look after these things for you, because otherwise Gary is going to find himself with HMRC wanting to know where the VAT is. And he's going to find himself having to pay corporation tax on the turnover personally, and he's going to find it's added to his income tax return, and he doesn't want any of those things to happen.
Right.
So we make sure that doesn't happen to him.
Yeah, Simon makes it so I can just contact the hotel, get the invoice sent, and forget about it and carry on with my day, which is always great. He takes the bureaucracy out of what otherwise would be quite a painful thing come tax return season.
Yes, understood. How many tickets do you guys? Well, let's see. How many tickets total? What's your max capacity for the event?
So absolute maximum for the event in the venue that we're in this year is 250.
Okay.
We hope to get somewhere close to filling that, and we're not too far off actually.
Where are you at? How many have you sold? How many are left?
I think we're just under 200 at the moment.
Yeah, so we're around about
yeah.
that.
Yeah, we're not too far off.
So
Pretty close.
So if nobody else signs up, you guys you're on. You've got a good conference, even with just under 200 people. That's still a good group of people.
Oh, yeah, we've definitely got enough people to put on a good show, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, plenty of people to come and fill slots for talks as well. So
Yeah. And in terms of cash flow, looks like we've collected enough money to refresh the pot for next year. So, I think this event is going to break even, and that's what we want to do. We don't want to make a profit. We do want to break even, and we want there to be about the same amount of money in the pot next February as there was in the pot in February when Gary took it.
Mm-hmm. What is the cost for it as far as per ticket?
So what we've always done with OggCamp is tried to keep it very accessible to people. Mm-hmm. So this year, I think it's no secret to anyone that the bottom has fallen out of the ad market, and sponsor money is much more difficult to get hold of. So this year we've said we're going to honour that pay what you can model, but we've got a suggested ticket price of £40. So for your £40, you get 2 days worth of really good solid talks on the scheduled track, plus whatever else turns up, plus the hallway track. But if you can't afford that, then absolutely you can pay us anything from £1 upwards. The only ask there is that you cover the cost of our ticketing platform effectively, because they charge us a small amount to issue tickets and store people's records and things like that.
Then there's the opposite end of the thing, where we have a bunch of people who say, we really want to support you. And rather than taking donations, we put on the system some high-price tickets. So we've had a whole load of people who have bought what we call professional tickets, which are the £100 tickets that for people who can expense it. And so we've had quite a few people who've bought professional tickets. They don't have to. They could have just bought the £1 tickets if they wanted to. And it's quite comforting and reassuring that if you look across all of those tickets we've sold, there's a pretty even spread of people at pretty much every price point between, I think the most anyone has paid is £200 and the least anyone has paid is £5 at the moment. And we have a pretty good spread across the whole spectrum there.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad to hear that you guys keep it affordable that way. I was looking at going to a conference, not anything particularly open source, although I tend to make conferences open source when I go to them. I famously was at a U.S. Department of Defense conference where they were talking about the problems with FPGA security. And, of course, I, from the back, why don't you just open source the tool chains if you want it to be more secure? I have lots of fun doing stuff like that. Anyway, this conference, I was looking at it, and the tickets were like $699 a piece or more if you wanted everything. It's like, oh, man, we can't expense that right now. So I think that's really neat that you guys make it affordable. You mentioned sponsors, and I was going to ask whether you have sponsorships. So how does that work? Do you guys do you have like a list of companies that you go after each year that it's going to be put on, and you say, hey, you guys supported last time, would you be interested in helping do this? And then is there a banner somewhere? Is there a banner wall where people come up and take their picture with all the logos behind them?
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, we do have that. So I think one of the nice things about OggCamp is that we've always tried to not be super corporate, right? You're not going to come and see logos of insert big FLOSS company here plastered in every single conference room. But what we want to do is cover our costs, and we want to return a fair value to those people who help us cover our costs. So this year we've actually ended up with 4 sponsors. I think I'm right in saying that none of them have sponsored us previously. They are all entirely new sponsors this year. And they are anything from kind of small software development companies to larger open source projects to a trade union. Actually, this year is our pinnacle sponsor. I mentioned Utah a couple of times.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they get their logo on a T-shirt. They'll get their logo on banners and things, and a personal thanks from us for really helping make OggCamp happen, because we just couldn't do it without that little bit of extra cash injection that we get from sponsors. I think, like I said earlier, Utah are running a couple of workshops this year and a panel discussion. A couple of other sponsors have got stands in our kind of community room where we sell merch and put out tables for people to do anything from play role-playing games to show off their cool Raspberry Pi projects. We have a list of people we target, but this year it's actually just been an entire new set of sponsors, which is actually really cool. And what we're hoping is that will introduce a whole new demographic of people to OggCamp.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask who the sponsors were, and I think you sort of just covered that. You've got the trade union. Is there any music? So one of the things that it sort of hits my mind that there might be an intersection here is that you could have musicians and people very, very interested in music, whether putting it on or doing talks about music or even building your own music hardware. It seems like you could have some of that.
Yeah, so Dan, previous organizer, had previously done our evening entertainment in 2019, which was quite cool.
Yeah.
We don't have any kind of scheduled evening music entertainment this year, but I'm absolutely sure that there will be people turning up with their cool synth project that they've built with ESP32s or something. I know we've definitely had things like that in the past where someone's turned up with, here's my rack of analog synths that I've built from open source hardware. There always is that kind of maker/music crowd, I think, that turns up at OggCamp. But again, it's kind of like we were saying, it really depends on who turns up as to what's going to be there. But that is one of the many crowds of people that turn up at OggCamp. Yeah.
Do you have anything like, I know in some conferences people like to come and actually camp out to attend it rather than having to pay. Is there something like that? Is there going to be a tent village?
I think it's unlikely.
Okay.
Manchester is not the greatest place to camp out during October, and it's going to be quite busy in the city this year. Because there is a sporting event going on as well at the same time as the conference. So I think everyone's very likely to either be local or in hotels. Certainly, I haven't booked a room yet, so I really must get around to doing that. I might be sleeping on the street.
Simon's going to be camped out on the street.
Simon's going to be on the bench outside in the hotel.
Simon's going to be in the hallway track. Like, hey, do you have an extra bed in your hotel room?
It's the hallway and sleeping bag track.
The sleeping bag. Oh, that's great. That's great. So let's see. What have I not covered? What else do you guys want to let folks know about? What else are you looking forward to with the conference?
I think for me, it's just getting something running like this in the UK again. Mm-hmm. I think the UK is kind of really lacking in these community-led FLOSS events. There's a bunch of them that exist across in the US, but we're definitely lacking in them in the UK. So I think for me, it's going to be the main thing I'm looking forward to is just seeing old faces, new faces, what people come up with, and really how the community has evolved in the last 5 years. I think really for me is the key thing that I want to get out of OggCamp this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar place to that. In the curious thing is I've been doing open source for a couple of decades, living in the UK, and I've always had to go abroad to go and do anything. And so there is a certain desire to hold grassroots events that are not about feeding a corporate strip mining open source culture, but they're actually about people who use things and make things. And so I've always loved OggCamp for that reason, that it's about the only event that I can go to in the UK. Actually, it isn't the only event in the UK. There is another conference in the UK now as well called EMF, which actually does have a camp out that happens as well, and that's also in the north of England. So there's now 2 events in the UK that are addressing that niche, and I find that really encouraging that that's happening. I've often wondered whether Europe needs to have a summer FOSDEM, and I'm kind of hoping that eventually one of these events is going to evolve a bit into a summer FOSDEM, so that we can have a Europe-wide open source event. Europe does have quite a few good open source events. There's a really good one that I'll be plugging later happening in northern Italy in November. And then there's a couple of good ones in Germany, like the one that happens in Bonn. And there's a good international conference called FLOSS Backstage that happens in Europe. So there's good things going on. But the UK has tended to be the one place where there has not been enough going on. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about being involved with OggCamp. I'm really pleased that Gary's come along this year. Gary is a very level-headed, very capable, sensible person. And I'm very pleased to be supporting him.
Yeah. You know, that idea about not having anything in the UK and sort of missing it. I get that, because like there's not a whole lot here in Oklahoma where I'm at, and be nice. Don't laugh at my state. I think Oklahoma is actually about the same size as UK, if I remember correctly. It's going to be on the Discord. Somebody put a picture of like the map of Europe and then Texas over it, and like Texas just is bigger than Germany and covers half of France and covers half of Italy. And you know, Doc Searles famously says that the big difference between the United States and Europe is, in the United States we think 100 years is old, and over in Europe y'all think 100 miles is far. And that really, I think that's actually really great. It covers the sort of the mindset difference that comes out of the history and geography of the two places. But like, I've had this thought, there's nothing in Oklahoma that I know of, at least nothing big. You got to go down to Texas, and I got real excited because there was somebody that was going to do like a once a year, I think it was the Texas Linux Fest, and it was going to be in Dallas. I'm like, oh, Dallas, that's you know, that's when not too much more than 100 miles. That's not very far. You know, I could get down there in 3 hours. That's not too bad. I don't know if that's happening again, because again, we got hit with COVID, and so a lot of things closed down. Yeah, it really makes me think that maybe we need more people from the community to start talking about things like this and try to put them on and put them together, because there is something to be said for getting together in person and not just over the internet. Meeting people in person and actually doing things, putting your hands on things together and fiddling around with stuff. So I think that is cool, and I look forward to hearing stories from this year about what all happened and which talks happened and which ones were popular, and people that got to meet each other for the first time.
And you know, Jonathan, we can discuss licensing OggCamp to you for OggCamp West if you want to run it over there in Oklahoma.
Well, it was that meeting of people in person that kind of inspired me, or I guess maybe drunkenly got me convinced to organise OggCamp this year.
Like all great ideas, it was birthed in a tavern, in a pub.
It genuinely happened in a pub, yeah. So it was actually, I worked for a brief period with a previous organiser, John Spriggs, and he was like, oh, I'd love to see OggCamp come back, but I don't want to be the one doing it. And you've been to OggCamp a load of times. You know how it works. How do you feel about putting on an OggCamp? And yeah, couple of beers later, and before you knew it, I was sending an email to Simon saying, hey, what do we need to do to get this thing kicked back off on a cold December night at a work Christmas party? So yeah, it's getting the community back together, I think, is where some of these things really, really spawn out of. So it's also going to be interesting to see, you know, like you said, what other things spawn out of OggCamp, and having people together that is going to happen. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say to all the OggCamp attendees and supporters who are listening that we're getting back together again this year. We haven't been able to nail down all the things that you want there to be there. So try and bring them with you this year if you can. And if you can't, help us organize it next year so that they're there. So, you know, as Gary said, we don't have an event organized on the intermediate night, on the Saturday night. It would have been great to have booked a room and got a band and had everyone, you know, able to order their fish and chips and mushy peas and their half a lager. But, you know, that didn't happen. And maybe it can next year, and maybe it's one of the people listening to this that's going to be the person that insists on organising it. It's probably too late to organise it this year. I think that the hotel told us that we've paid for a certain number of rooms. We could go back to them and try and say, hey, you said we said we didn't need the ballroom. Well, we do now. And if you're listening to me saying this and you really want to organise the thing in the ballroom, then get in touch. My email address is simon@webmink.com, and you can get a hold of me that way. So this year I see very much as a relaunch. It's doing the things that we know work, hoping someone's going to bring the stuff that we haven't been able to organise, but really hoping that we're going to have some new blood who are going to help us organise double this event next year.
Yeah. So what, like, you allude to this, what's not happening that people wanted to see happen this year? What happens in the ballroom?
Well, what happens in the ballroom stays in the ballroom, I guess. But
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I walked into that one.
I mean, previous years, OggCamp has been quite famous, I think, for its social track. So we've always had some kind of entertainment on maybe the Friday night, definitely the Saturday night, and occasionally actually the Sunday night. We've always had some kind of pre-arranged entertainment. So whether it be a band playing or some kind of FLOSS quiz on the Saturday night or something like that. Like Simon said, this year our focus has really been on what do we need to do to get OggCamp up and running. And what do we need to do that in a way that is sustainable for a small new organising crew? So some things like that have fallen by the wayside. And Simon alluded to things like the raffle. We're pretty sure the raffle's going to happen this year, the kind of famous OggCamp raffle. We just need to, as an organising crew, get our head into gear and make sure that we've got everything that's needed in terms of prizes there. So I think the big thing is going to be the social track. I think that's the big difference that people might notice this year compared to previous years. But that said, the hotel have graciously said that we will have the bar open for OggCamp, and they're putting on some food and things like that for attendees to buy at a reduced rate. So there will be social tracks coming. There will be things happening, and I think it's human nature to have a like-minded group of people get together and congregate in the hotel bar or head off elsewhere. I think it will feel like an OggCamp. It's just going to be a case of I guess a little bit of autonomy happening among attendees that perhaps we didn't do quite as much before.
Yeah, my wife is in the Discord, and she's also apparently listening to some of this, and she says, if life circumstances were different this year, I'd all be for attending this conference in Manchester. Like, both of us. None of this just sending Jonathan business. In years past, I went to a conference in Dublin by myself, and while it was fun, it was a bit of a bummer that I couldn't take her along. So one of these days...
it's not too late. Just check out what flights are available. There's going to be some cheap flights direct to Manchester. You can just make the weekend for it.
Yeah, I think our kids are a little too young for that at this point, but that's all right. Maybe in a couple of years. So let me ask you this: what are some like highlights from the last couple of times you guys had OggCamp? What are some of the talks that really you remember, or just memories you have that you think people would enjoy hearing about?
I think for me, the first OggCamp I went to was really eye-opening, just as to how small the UK is. So I ended up actually talking to a guy on one of the Hall Ray tracks, and I'm from a fairly small county in the UK, so Norfolk on the east coast, for anyone who knows it. Quite famous for the fact that we've got no motorways in only one city. So it's a fairly small place, and I got talking to this guy, and he was like, where are you from? And I said where I was from. And it turns out that he lives 5 minutes down the road. We both have had similar jobs at the time, very similar kind of interests in FLOSS and things like that. And we've stayed in touch ever since. So that for me was a real OggCamp highlight. But in terms of talks and things, it's actually been the talks that aren't necessarily directly FLOSS related that have really appealed to me. So I kind of alluded to before that we've had talks on things like mental health and stuff like that, and actually going along to those talks and just hearing those insights as to, this person struggles with these same things of, struggles of working in IT as I do, or this person has come across this particular problem they've tried to solve in this way, and perhaps that's a different way that I could approach something that have always been highlights for me. So it's almost been the unexpected things that you couldn't plan for going to a conference that have been highlights for me.
Simon, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, wandering around, seeing the toys people have got in the exhibit area where the tables are. That's always a feature for me. I remember having a picnic on the front steps of the venue in Liverpool when the conference was held there. I remember giving a talk all about the legislation that keeps on trying to backdoor crypto, which is back again this year, just
yes,
in
of
case
course.
you had any concerns. So those are all pretty, they're minor sounding things. They're pretty random. For me, the event, this is not the event where there are the big corporate talks. This is the event where there are the important new relationships are created. And that's what I really hope for this year as well, is that we'll meet interesting people and befriend them.
Yeah. Yep. Very cool. All right. Let's see. What have I not asked about? What have we not covered that we ought to let folks know about?
Great questions. So if you want to buy tickets, there are still a few available. You can find them at I think OggCamp is the easiest to remember URL that will get you there. So if you type in OggCamp, it will take you to our website. And I'm pretty sure that we bought all the other websites that sound like that as well. So I think we have oggcamp.com and things. But the cool one is ogg.camp.
There you go.
I encourage you to pay what you can for the tickets, and that means at both ends of the scale. If you can afford the $1,000 for the ticket, please buy a ticket for $1,000, because you're investing in the future of the conference when you do that. The conference isn't run for the benefit of anyone financially. What will happen if there is a surplus is Public Software will hang on to it, and it will be available for next year's conference to be bigger and better. Yeah. So it's if you can afford to buy the £1,000 ticket. We don't actually have £1,000 ticket, Gary. Could you fix that before the show goes out?
Yeah.
Go ahead and do that. Also, keep an eye on the socials. We do have a couple of venues. I don't think we've fixed on an official venue on social networks this year, but we do have a Mastodon account. We do have a room on Matrix that you can find. And there may be some other remnants somewhere. I think we might still be on that social network that nobody should use anymore.
Ouch.
Yeah, there's a few places. There's the X account. There's a Telegram group. There's a Discord as well. I know you love hanging out on Discord, Jonathan. Lots of
I didn't say
there.
I love hanging out in Discord. I said that's where I find myself a lot.
Yeah, I think I'm in like 5 Discords at this point. I can't honestly say I read messages in all of them.
I'd have to go count. Oh my goodness, a lot.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. So ogg.camp is probably the place to go, and anything that you need to know is kind of linked from there, really.
Yeah. What are the dates? I don't think we've ever actually said. When is this?
It's the 12th and 13th of October this year, so coming up in just a couple of weeks.
Less than a couple of weeks. Yeah, that is coming up soon.
There's still rooms at the hotel, so you can still stay at the venue, which is the Pendulum Hotel in Manchester. So that's available. There's still a few tickets left. If you're quick, Gary's going to have to turn off the tickets when we reach the fire limit for the venue. So you want to get in there as soon as you hear me saying this. Just stop listening now and go to ogg.camp and buy your tickets.
Yeah, that's the important thing, right? You don't have to listen to the episode if you're going to be there. What year did OggCamp start?
Oh, you'll know this better than I will, Simon.
I don't know. I joined it after the fact.
2009, I think.
2009.
The last OggCamp was our 10th anniversary in 2019. So This is the 11th OggCamp, but is our 15th year, which feels like another milestone.
Yeah. Boy, the world was different in 2009. Goodness.
Those were the days.
Yes, they were.
Still a Sun Microsystems then.
Yeah. Gary, I didn't ask, and I guess I should. How did you get into? We know Simon. We know where Simon came from. How did you get into like the whole open source and free world? Like, what was your gateway drug that got you interested and that you started coming to OggCamp?
It was a teacher back in high school actually who handed me a Kubuntu CD. So, yeah, I at the time was running a not so great laptop that had been handed down and handed down and handed down, and Windows didn't run so well on it. And I just went to this teacher who was a Gentoo user back then, and I said, "Yeah, what could I do to sort this out?" And he said, "I'll sort you something out tomorrow." And came in and almost dealt under the desk this Kubuntu. I think it was a Kubuntu 710 or 704 or something CD.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yep, here you go." And never looked back. I installed that on that machine. It lasted me another few years, and I guess from there ended up getting into working in IT, advocating for replacing a bunch of Windows stuff with FLOSS where it made sense. Then kind of got into the kind of cloud world and continued to advocate for open source stuff there, along with attending OggCamp and FOSDEM and Linux Fest Northwest, and anywhere I could get my fill of FOSS goodness. That's where I've been for the last 10 or 15 years, I suppose.
And you're thankful that your teacher gave you a Kubuntu disk and not a Gentoo disk.
Yeah, I mean, it might have had a slightly different appeal. I mean, since then I've moved off of the Plasma desktop and daily driving Fedora with GNOME. But I mean, it was probably a wise choice not to send me down the road of doing a Gentoo install at 12, 13 years old or whatever it was.
Yeah. All right. So let me actually cover this, and we get to ask Simon. I don't think we asked Simon this. And I don't know the answers. We're going to start with Gary. I want to know, what's your favorite text editor and scripting language?
For me, it's got to be Nano and Bash. I want to deal with something simple. So I actually spend a lot of time just in Nano writing stuff in Bash, which is it's probably the most boring, terrible answer I could give. But for me, I'm all about keeping things simple.
No, that's all good. Simon, I don't know that I know the answers to this. I don't know that we've ever asked you. What's your favorite text editor and scripting language?
So I never really got into text editor religion, and I use whatever there is that is on the system I'm running. I have a soft spot for Nano on my Raspberry Pis, but I used to enjoy using E when I was at IBM, and which nobody will know about. So E is the editor that Emacs became when you added the macro language.
Okay.
Right.
So I used to enjoy using that. I do most of my editing these days in whatever notepad I can pop up on the device I'm using at the moment, and I use Markdown. And when it comes to scripting, it's been a while, I have to tell you. So the last scripting language that I used in Anger was on a Cyan organizer. I actually wrote commercial software in Cyan Organizer scripting language.
As you weren't lying when you said it'd been a while, eh? I think for me, it's a really difficult question to answer these days because I spend so much of my time in the cloud world that it's like, whatever thing abstracts away the cloud is what I end up using. So I end up writing a lot of Terraform and Ansible and CDK and stuff these days, just because I guess that's what I work with day to day. So I don't get to play with much nice, cool scripting stuff anymore.
Yeah, to give you an idea of how old we're talking here, Jonathan. My story was a little bit like Gary's. So my physics teacher at school was moonlighting while he was teaching physics and making the motherboards for for development systems that used a 6800 microprocessor called SWTP 6800 development systems. This was in 1977. And so that was my first computer because he used to soak test them in one of the labs, and we used to go in during the breaks and program them. And the reason I'm telling you that story is I went round the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley recently, and there is the computer that I learned to program assembly language on, sitting in the Computer History Museum. And that's how I know I'm old.
When you find your first computer sitting in a museum, yeah, that would do it. Now I have to think, like, what was my first computer that I ever actually did anything on, and is it old enough? It might be. The first one I ever played with, my dad had one of the Trash 80s, TRS 80. But that wasn't really modern then. That was like pulled out of storage. But I think we had a Tandy, one of the original Tandys, and I think those are just old enough to be museum pieces now. So I suppose I'm old too.
Yeah,
I feel really young.
You keep using that hair dye, Jonathan.
No, mine's all natural. There's a little gray poking in there, but it's not too bad.
Now I feel young when I can say that it was a Pentium 133. That was the first machine I really used and did stuff on. But even then, that was somewhat of a hand-me-down, I suppose.
Yeah, I get it. All right. Well, I won't be there, but I'm looking forward to OggCamp because it sounds like you guys are going to have a great time this year, and hopefully
we're going to have an old fogies reminiscence session over a beer in the bar at the hotel, where I will show people photographs of the SWTP 6800, and we can talk about the 6800 assembly language and the unique register commands it had.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? You guys keep doing it, and you'll eventually have the retro computing track. People will bring their old machines and let people play with them. All right.
Now, there's an idea. Next year, Gary, okay?
Yeah, we'll put it on the list.
I mean, retro computing is big right now. There's a lot of people that are very nostalgic for the machines of yesteryear. So, all right. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it very much. Gary, particularly, thanks for coming and telling us all about the conference. And best of luck here in a couple of weeks, that everything goes exactly the way you want it to. And, all the surprises are good and all of that stuff.
And tech gods are with us for demos and audio and projectors and other such things.
Yes. I've been that guy, and there's always something that surprises you. Awesome. Thank you so much. Simon, this is where normally I ask you what you think, but you were sort of the guest too. I guess I'll go ahead and ask you, though.
Well, I think everyone should buy tickets and come to the conference in Manchester because, I could hype it up and say it's going to be, a super majestic, technical, whiz, orgasmic thing. But actually, we're just going to be a group of people who want to be friends, coming together and sharing a space and sharing our interests with each other. And I think that if that appeals to you, then you should go get a ticket. And if that doesn't appeal to you, you really should go to, I don't know, some Oracle conference.
If that doesn't appeal to you, then maybe you need to rethink the decisions that have led you to this point in your life.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Well, next week, interestingly, we have somebody from IBM going to talk about their open AI stuff. And it'll be very interesting to compare notes with what IBM thinks about open source LLMs and AI with what OSI and Mr. Simon Phipps thinks about it. So we'll keep that kind of as a bug in the back of our minds as we talk to IBM about it. Simon, is there anything you want to plug since we have you here?
There's OggCamp, obviously. Go to ogg.camp and buy a ticket now. I also help organize another conference in Europe called South Tyrol Free Software Conference, which is another conference that you might not have run into. It's now grown into quite a big conference. There'll be over 1,000 people there. It's held in a beautiful city in northern Italy called Bolzano. It is the second weekend in November, and I would love anybody who is listening to this, is in Europe, can't make it to Manchester, to come and meet me in Bolzano for SFSCon. The website is sfscon.it, and the conference is conducted in English and will be fantastic.
Excellent. And what about you personally? Where can people go to find you?
Probably the best place is on Mastodon, where you'll find me as webmink at meshed.cloud, meshed.cloud. And I would love to see you popping up there and saying hi and following me. Most of my stuff, if you want to find out about me, is at a website called Webmink. That's webm.ink. And that's got all the pointers to everything about me on it.
Simon, you're all about the fun TLDs.
Well, they exist, and it seems a crime not to make the most of them.
Not to have fun with them.
Because you can do good things that are memorable with them, So, you can email me if you want to. I'm simon@phips.email. You can have a look at my website. It's webm.ink. And I host my own Mastodon server at mesh.cloud.
Oh,
so
very
find
cool.
me in one of those places.
Running on a Raspberry Pi.
That one is not. That one is actually running on a slightly more robust hosting server because it turns out it takes quite a lot of energy.
Yeah, yep. It makes sense. All right, thank you, sir, for being here. Sure do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invite. Have me back again sometime.
Oh, for sure. Goodness, we've got to. We've only got so many co-hosts, and people get tired of listening to Dan and Doc and all of that. Definitely an important part of the crew, man. All right, so if you want to find me, of course, you can go to Hackaday. That is the home of Floss Weekly these days, and we sure appreciate that. I've also got the security column that goes live on Hackaday every Friday morning. Keep you up to date with the bits and the bytes that are moving in ways they're not supposed to. And then we do, of course, have the Untitled Linux show over at twit.tv still, and we have a lot of fun there covering the news and a bit of open source stuff, but with a decidedly Linux twist on it. So make sure and check that out too. We do appreciate everybody that's here, those that watch both live and on the download, and we will see you next week on Floss Weekly.